Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday, and welcome to Sangha Ocean Beach Online. My name is Brother Dave, and as many of you know, tomorrow is our teacher, the Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh's 95th birthday. And so the theme of our gathering today will be celebrating him, his life, and his teachings. I'm so excited and so happy you're here. As always, we're going to begin just by taking some time to give ourselves a chance to arrive. We start with our external environment, making sure our technology is set up sufficiently so we don't have to play with it. I like to make sure I have a drink nearby. We don't rush this stage. And then once we're physically done settling with all of our stuff, then we bring our attention in. We start to just listen to our body, check in with where we're really at right now in a non-judgmental, non-critical way. Maybe you have been sitting in front of your computer in silence for 10 minutes in preparation for this hour. And so maybe when you check in this moment with your body, you're already calm, breathing deeply. Maybe your life worked today in such a way that you just ran up a flight of stairs and are still rushing to set up your technology as I am speaking. Most importantly, what we are doing now is coming home to an intention to love ourselves no matter which of those are true, no matter where we are on that spectrum. Our time together is not about being statues that look like they are very mindful, but instead, our time together is about being truly present with each other, wherever we are, internally, externally, physically, emotionally. Today's beginning sit is going to be a short one, just about 5 minutes, and it's going to be in silence, which I know we don't normally do here at Sangha Ocean Beach Online. I almost always guide our initial sit. But today, in honor of Thai, as we like to call our teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, which just means Thai in a very respectful and loving way, I would like us to just sit in silence for the next 5 minutes. If you'd like some words for your mind to chew on, the way a baby likes a pacifier, here they are. Breathing in, I am aware of my body. Breathing out, I am here. It is now. Breathing in, I am aware of my body. Breathing out, it is here. It is now. This period of 5 minutes of silent meditation will begin with 3 sounds of the bell and will end with 2 sounds of the bell. Feel free to adjust. Be gentle with yourself. You can even smile. Thank you, friends. Feel free to stretch out and unwind and massage yourselves. I don't know about for all of you, but that was a fast 5 minutes for me. Felt like an instant. So I come to our meeting today with 3 aspirations. The first is I'd like to speak just briefly about the life of our teacher, the Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh. Most of what I'm going to say you can read in a book, and so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but I will talk about it a little bit because it's helpful to understand his teachings in the context of his amazing life. And then secondly, I'm going to dedicate a little bit more time to my own personal experience of being his disciple and what that means, how I've come to understand some of his most basic teachings and how I live and practice them. That's going to be fun. And then thirdly, as we typically do, I'm going to open it up so that all of you can share any experiences you might have had with Thai, with his teachings, or with the practice itself. So let's dive in. I'd like to start with a story. In 2013, I was not yet a monk, but already living full-time in Thai's monasteries. Back then, when he had the health to do so, prior to the couple of strokes he had in the 2013 to 2015 range that have debilitated him to a point where he's in a wheelchair and paralyzed on one side of his body and unable to speak now. He's just enjoying his life in a very quiet way right now. In the monastery in central Vietnam, in a city called Hue, and that is where his root temple is. So right now, Thai will turn 95 tomorrow at his home monastery, at his root temple in Vietnam, which is very important and beautiful because for most of the last 50 years, he's been in exile from Vietnam. During the Vietnam War, both sides, the communists in the north and the other side in the south, I don't know how to refer to them, wanted his support, right? Wanted their spiritual leader. Think of Thich Nhat Hanh as to Vietnam, as you might think of the Dalai Lama as to Tibet, right? A very revered spiritual figure in the country. So both sides were very invested in his support. Thich Nhat Hanh gave it to neither, and instead traveled to the United States and talked about peace and said over and over again that it wasn't that he wanted this side to win or that side to win, or that he sided with this ideology or that ideology, but rather he wanted his country to know peace. This is from a man who had lived not just through all those years of death and destruction when the Americans and the Vietnamese were fighting, but prior to that, his country in the 40s and 50s was occupied and terrorized by the French. And so he had lived through decades of war. The first book of the over 100 books that he's written in his life was called A Lotus in a Sea of Fire. And that lotus is Vietnam. And it was a history of his country and all of its suffering and all the beauty that had come out of that suffering, all the lotuses that had grown up out of that mud. So the story. So it's 2013. And back then, when he still had the health, he would travel North America once every other year and go on a tour and stop at a bunch of different monasteries and big cities and give talks and retreats. He had a North American tour. In this particular year, in 2013, I got to travel with him and his Sangha of about 100 monks and nuns. It was the life experience that ultimately inspired me to ordain and to become a monk. I was already ordained, as this jacket signifies, as a lay disciple of Thich Nhat Hanh, but we'll talk about that more. And so we were traveling all around North America, and this was the time when we stopped in Boston. There's not a monastery in the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition in Boston, but there's a lot of practice energy there. The Sanghas in Boston are old, very strong. A lot of teachers, long time practitioners, people that have been practicing with Thai since the 70s and 80s, living in Boston. Thai was to give a talk, a public talk, and it was set up in support and in collaboration with Trinity Church, that famous old church in Boston. So they set up this gigantic stage with kind of stadium benches so that the 100 monks and nuns that Thai travels with, like a rock star with a gigantic entourage, just demonstrating Sangha and community everywhere he would go, could be sitting behind him. And there he was sitting, as I am now, like cross-legged on a cushion on this stage, on the steps of Trinity Church, facing a public square, bit of a park called Copley Square in Boston, a very old part of town. And I would estimate on this beautiful sunny day that there were about 5,000 people there. I would say there were about 5,000 people sitting on blankets and in chairs on the grass in front of Thai. And the monks and nuns, as they would typically do, did some chanting and stuff to kind of set the mood, get people ready. And then the head pastor or minister of Trinity Church, who of course is a phenomenal orator, public speaker, came up to the lectern and gave this just rousing, unbelievable introduction for Thai, talking about his life and his work in charities and in Vietnam and his life of being a peace activist. I mean, it was impressive. It was an impressive introduction. And when he was done, kind of very dramatically like gestured to Thai, who the whole time was just sitting on the floor on this little cushion, and said, "And now I give you the Zen Master, Thich Nhat Hanh." I, not yet being a monk, was not in the bleachers, right? And so I was kind of hiding behind them, looking out. And so I was looking at the 5,000 people that were looking at Thai. I was looking at the crowd. And I got to watch those 10,000 eyes go from the Trinity Church person, the pastor or minister, whatever they're called. I got to watch these 10,000 eyes go from that person to Thai. It was a very beautiful moment, watching attention move. And Thich Nhat Hanh closed his eyes and sat in silence for 25 minutes. Oh, God. So I'm watching, right? Because at first, as I think was the case for everybody assembled, I was thinking, okay, he's just kind of gathering himself. He's taking a few breaths. He's going to say something any minute now. But this was not the case. This was not the case. And knowing him, once I realized that he wasn't immediately going to speak, I knew that there was no telling when he was going to break that silence. I knew that from experience. But not everybody did. And so I couldn't help myself, and I kept my eyes open. And I just watched the crowd respond to this silent teaching. The first thing I saw were the other people who had been practicing over the years with Thich Nhat Hanh. Because very quickly, those people, most of whom were already in some type of meditation posture, just closed their eyes and just went in. Just understood, like, oh, okay, we're sitting now. Let's practice. And then the next wave that I saw, right, were people who maybe weren't super familiar with Thich Nhat Hanh, but who had had some experience, whether they were meditators, whether they were yogis, who understood, oh, I see, like, this is a moment of silence, and I don't know how long it's going to last. And those people started adjusting themselves and getting into more comfortable positions and putting down their sandwiches, and falling silent and coming home. And then the next wave were people who maybe had never experienced anything like this before, who were just there because they had seen it advertised online, or were there because their friends brought them, were there because their spouse was a practitioner. And I watched those people, and they were kind of just looking about themselves, as we do as human beings. Like, well, what's happening right now? What is the right thing to do? And as we do, they just copied. Right? So they saw the first maybe 1,000 people fall into some kind of silence, and they started doing the same thing too. The third wave was very beautiful because they didn't have any idea that they had to do it in a certain way. They didn't have K-Puck filled, organic cotton meditation cushions with them. They weren't necessarily sipping green tea and having bells and chimes in their pockets, right? They were just people in Boston in a park. And so they did what they thought made sense to do in that moment. They threw down blankets. They put on their sunglasses, laid down. They took off their headphones, right? They pulled out their phones and started putting them on Do Not Disturb. The third wave was very beautiful to watch. Right? That didn't happen until about the 5 or even 10-minute mark. And then the fourth wave, the fourth response to this just silent projection, this deep transmission, broke past the boundaries of the park. Most people in the United States have never seen 5,000 people sitting still in silence before. Have you? It's very loud. It's very loud to see 5,000 people sit in silence. It's such a strong statement, especially in that place, in this busy town square in a big American city. And so that energy broke the boundaries of our gathering, and people on the sidewalk stopped and stood in silence and stared. Buskers and performers, as Boston has a lot of, stopped performing and joined us. Cars started slowing down, pulling over, rolling down their windows, wanting to ascertain what's taking place here. That silence spread out as far as I could see. As far as I could see. And then 25 minutes later, Thai finally opened his eyes and spoke. And to be honest with you, I don't remember a word of what he said. Because of course it wasn't at all the point. What he was doing was not talking about Zen, he was being Zen. He wasn't talking about coming home in a loving and non-judgmental way to the present moment. He was doing it. And there is no more effective way, in my life experience, to share the practice with other human beings. We can talk about it, we can write about it, but we have to ultimately do it. And if I was to sum up my experience of the Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh as a man, as a religious figure, as a teacher, I would say that's the most important thing. Is that every time I was in his presence, whether it was electronically, like watching one of his talks, like when we lived in the monasteries, we would watch a talk of his, usually a 90-minute talk, once or sometimes twice a week. So I've probably seen him speak 1,000 times or more. Whether it was him walking silently in the morning to go have his breakfast, whether it was him standing in front of 1,500 people hanging on his every word and taking the time to be fully present when he removed the cap from a dry erase marker that he was about to write on the whiteboard. From the very first time I laid eyes on him, I saw something that I don't know if I had ever seen before. I saw somebody who was completely practicing. Wasn't just talking about it, who was being it, who was embodying the practice. And alongside it, as many of you know, Thai is a phenomenal scholar, speaks multiple languages, has such a deep understanding of the history of Buddhist thought and practice that by the time he was old enough to attend Buddhist university, many years after he ordained as a monk at about 15 or 16, they were already studying books in the Buddhist university in Vietnam that Thai had written. He's an incredible mind and an incredible capacity to communicate it, whether it be in Vietnamese or in English or in French or in Chinese or in Sanskrit or in Pali. And on and on. And many of those words have affected me, of course. But the thing I really wanted to share with you, the thing that I think is the most important, is that what changed my life was meeting a human being who was giving his whole life energy, everything, to the practice of being present in a loving way. As I like to define mindfulness, paying attention with love. I didn't have those words for it 15 years ago when I became his student. But those are the words I use now. It was the first time I had seen a person just always paying attention with love. I had tasted it before. My father's father, after whom I'm named, my grandfather, Dave Kenneally, had a lot of that in him. He was a very, very spiritual man in the Catholic faith, like kind of guy who went to mass every morning before he went to work in Ireland. Very, very devout Catholic. So I felt some of that power, some of that peace off of my grandfather. And then I feel like I touched it again many, many years later, sitting in front of Thich Nhat Hanh. It would be easy, right, for me to talk about all of the philosophical understandings, all of the nuanced teaching in his 100 books and in his thousands and thousands of talks. And I don't want to discount those. It's not that they're not important. But given limited time, And the audience I knew I was going to be talking to, I wanted to start here. I'm not a scholar of the Vietnamese language, and the Vietnamese language is very complex. My own name when I was a monk was Brother Minh Tam, and I translated that as Brother Heart. Tam can be translated as mind and heart. And the word min before it can be translated in a half a dozen ways that I know of: pure, clear, strong, true, radiant. It's a very complex language. But that said, my understanding of what Thich Nhat Hanh means, right? Thich is a prefix. Think of it like professor, teacher. So the name is Nhat Hanh. And one way to translate Nhat Hanh is to translate it as one action or highest action. So professor, one action. And when I learned that many years ago, I asked myself the question, well, what's the one action? What is his highest action? And if I could sum it up, I would say it's exactly that. His one action is embodying the practice, being love in the present moment for the purpose of helping other people to do the same. Just like if we have a choir master and a very talented musician with us here today. Hi, Shane. Wonderful to see you, dear brother. Just as if Shane wanted us all to sing in the same note, he knows that the easiest way to do it is to sing it himself. The easiest way to bring us all to an A is to sing one. This is how we bring people together. This is how we produce harmony, not by talking about it, not by writing about it in the abstract. The most direct way is to be it. I think this is Thai's one action. I think this is Thai's highest action. When I look back at what I know of his life and how I've experienced him as a teacher, that's what I boil it down to. That's what I boil it down to. And then his life history is basically just an explanation of how he got there, just like is the case for all of us. Like, how did I get here? How did you get there? I had a series of things happening and choices made. Things happening and choices made. In a very short summary, he became a monk very young. He was in this war-torn, dangerous place where the people he loved were dying all around him, were being murdered. And yet, he understood that there was this other way of living. Vietnam is a Buddhist culture. He understood from very young that there was an alternative to this. And he chose it. Something in him as a very young man said, that's how I want to live. I don't want to be war, I want to be peace. And then years later, when he was a very respected scholar and teacher during the conflict between America and Vietnam, he stood up inside of the monastery and looked around him and said to his peers, to the other Buddhist elders, like, what are we doing here? Why are we here safe inside of these monastery walls when our country is on fire? Let's go out there. Let's get our hands dirty. Let's help. And not surprisingly, given the thousands of years of tradition that they were trying to uphold, most of them said, no thanks. I'm good. Peace. This is my job, right? I chant and I teach and I maintain these sacred grounds. But Thai was unsatisfied with this. So he stepped out and he created the School of Youth for Social Service. which is akin to how we might think of the Peace Corps. He created a Peace Corps inside of Vietnam and started training what ultimately became thousands of young people, a lot of college kids, to be social workers and to go out to these war-torn, smashed, bombed, burned, destroyed villages all over his country. And to help them lift up, rebuild, dig that well again, rebuild the schoolhouse, sit and find a way to be calm and to love, even in the midst of all of that death and destruction. On the full moon day of February 1966, he ordained his first disciples. Just 6 of them. He created his own school, Thiep Hien, as it's called in Vietnamese, meaning the order of interbeing, the school of interconnection. And he took the sort of classic moral precepts of Buddhism, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, etc. There are 5 of them. He modernized them for us in the form of what are now called the 5 mindfulness trainings to make it easier for us to understand them and practice them. And on that day, in 1966, he gave these 6 disciples what are now called the 14 mindfulness trainings, which are an expansion even on the 5 classic moral precepts. The 14 mindfulness trainings are a training that I live by, that are designed not just to help us practice internally, but then to help us bring that practice out into the world, 20 years after that, sometime in the 80s, he got tired of traveling the world and being this famous dude, giving these talks, going someplace once a year maybe, and breaking it off, giving them some wisdom, and then coming back a year later and seeing like, they're still not practicing. They're still not listening. They still don't get it. And so it was in the 80s, finally, that he said, if I really want to teach what I have to teach, I need disciples. I need to be teaching them every day, all the time. And that's when he started accepting more monks and nuns and building the community that it has today. He has about 600 monks and nuns and lay members of the Order of Interbeing like myself, who wear these, I call them snack jackets, because they have nice big pockets that are great for snacks. It's more formally called the jacket of the Order of Interbeing. There are about 3,000 of us in the world, as I understand it. And so he started in the 80s, teaching people like me who understood, like, if I really want to get what this guy has to say, I'm going to have to practice with him all the time. It's deeper than words. It's about how I live. It's about how I live. And because I want to leave time to hear from all of you, I'll end with just one more thing. Because I know if I were sitting where you were sitting, the question I would ask me is, well, okay, that's great. And I don't have time to read 100 books. And, even if I start practicing now, it's going to take me 15 years to practice like you have done, Brother Dave. Like, what one thing do you want me to know? What one thing stands out? I would want to know the answer to that question. So for me, it's 3 words. Understanding is love. Thich Nhat Hanh teaches that the word understanding and the word love are synonyms. That those 2 words mean exactly the same thing. When I first heard that, I balked. I love words, as you can probably tell. If you heard me jaw jack enough Sundays. And in my brain and my literate, exacting, discerning brain, When I heard that, I said, no, they don't. Those two words are very different. They mean very different things. And so in a lot of ways, I would say I've spent the last 15 years, I practiced as a mindfulness practitioner for about 10 years before I met Thich. I've been practicing mindfulness in yogic and other forms for about 25 years. But for the last 15 years, Thich has been my primary teacher. Thich is my teacher. So for the last 15 years, I've been asking myself this question, like, what does he mean by that? How could that possibly be true? And I'm still figuring it out. But I'll tell you what I've come to. And it's this simple. If I am interacting with another human being, especially one that I really care about, and I experience a moment of disappointment, right? The pain of a disappointment, then that tells me that I was holding an expectation. No expectation, no disappointment. Even more, if I am experiencing a disappointment because this person or persons did not meet my expectation, that tells me that my expectation is flawed. Because they are just being them. And so, if my expectation is incorrect, well, then I need more understanding. Because if I understand people very deeply, then I will not fall into the trap of having expectations of them that are not grounded in a deep understanding of them and myself. And so if I want to abate, diminish, cease the disappointment, I need more understanding. And if understanding is love, then my response is to love more. I love them more. I love myself more in that pain of disappointment. And that love increases our understanding of each other, my understanding of myself, and therefore my ability to understand them, and then secondarily, my understanding of them. And then my expectations improve, my disappointments diminish or disappear. This has been the singular teaching that has changed my life and that is in the process still of changing my life. Thank you so much for listening. And now I'd like to open it up to the Sangha. As always, if you're here via audio only, you're very welcome to share without coming on camera. We welcome that. And I'd love to hear anything that you'd like to ask a question about Thich, or your own experience if you've been studying or practicing in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, including just coming to my Sangha. Or if you're very new to the teachings and to Thich Nhat Hanh, then I'd love to hear about how you're practicing, how your practice is going. I'm going to take a look. There's something in the chat. Okay, we have a question from Kat. Hi, Kat. Can I say your question, Kat, out loud? Is that okay? Are men and women treated the same in the tradition? Do they have the same levels of leadership? Okay, wow. Beautiful and deep question. When we talk about these teachings, it's helpful to put them in a few different buckets. One bucket is the teaching of the practice of mindfulness. And this is a completely secular teaching. The Dalai Lama was once asked, is Buddhism a religion? And his answer was no. Buddhism is a science of the mind. So one way that we can look at this whole big picture that we're talking about is a science of the mind. And in that bucket, very obviously, there's no difference between men and women. There's no difference between heterosexuals and homosexuals, right? It's just science of the mind. It's science. We're all on a level playing field there. And then another way to look at this whole experience that we're having of meeting mindfulness as it's being taught by not just a monastic, right? Somebody who spent a life of celibacy, a life living in a gender segregated way. Like monks and nuns don't live together, right? They live quite separately, even inside of a monastery. Most of the monasteries I've been at, you can't even see the nuns' quarters from the monks' quarters, and vice versa. Like they're a good walk away from each other, like a 10-minute walk away. And a lot of people are approaching Buddhism then in a third bucket, right? From this monastic perspective, right? A third bucket, there are a lot of people that are approaching the teachings from a culturally religious standpoint, right? So to Tibetans, for example, like the Dalai Lama is something of a god. Right? They have a very religious experience of this man who, when he's in a Western setting, is talking about a science of the mind. And so to really answer your question, Kat, we have to look at it in all three of those categories, right? In the category of secular science of the mind, that's thousands of years old, right? But we also have to look at it as a religion, right? Because even though I don't interact with my Buddhist practice in a religious way, it'd be really easy, right, to look at me in my snack jacket and be like, oh, is he some kind of priest? Like, Brother Dave? And then, right, we have to look at it from the perspective of the culture of the person practicing it. Because Vietnamese people having lived their life as Vietnamese people, are going to encounter the teachings in a very different way than Tibetan people are going to encounter the teachings in a very different way than people from Dallas, Texas are. So there's a cultural element there of how we understand every word that's being spoken, every word that's being written. We're all looking at the world through our own little lens. And so in the ultimate dimension, Kat, there is no teaching in Buddhism that says women are less than men or that, men are better. Not at all. Not at all. And I invite you to look at, you can just Google 14 mindfulness trainings, Thich Nhat Hanh. You can look at the code of the Order of Interbeing, and you'll see it's full of openness and inclusivity. There's no separation. There's no dualities there. But that said, right, for thousands of years, the way Buddhist religious practices have been done, right, there's a lot of emphasis on gender and separation, right? If you're trying to be celibate, for example, it's a lot easier to do if the person you want to have sex with isn't around a lot. It's just to be practical, right? So there's not always equality, right? There's not always equality. Sometimes the old ideas of men being better, stronger, more important, more capable, right? All these outdated sexist tropes do still rear their ugly head in religious Buddhist practice, especially from cultures that are less kind of modernized, that are more traditional. So yes, there is still some of that there. Now, in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh specifically, way less than in other traditions I've encountered. Some of Thich Nhat Hanh's highest, most revered teachers, right, are females. I would say his right and left hands are two nuns. When he ordained those first 6 people in February of 1966, right, 3 of them were men and 3 of them were women. The men became lay disciples like I am right now. and the women became nuns. So his first monastic disciples were 3 nuns. So I think he's done a lot of work to unwind that problem. But I think the best way I've ever heard it said is it's unreasonable of us to expect an Asian monastic tradition to be at the cutting edge of what we're still learning ourselves about what is really it means to be a man or to be a woman or to be cis or to be trans or to be straight or to be gay. They're just not really well set up to learn and understand that. I mean, they live gender segregated, right? In only 2 camps. There's no third one. And so they're trying, but they're not going to lead us there. We have to learn the practices from them and then lead them there. That's what I'll say about that. Thanks for your question. So the floor is open. Anyone like to ask a question or share? You have a hand. I'm going to invite you to unmute.
Good morning, Brother Dave. Good morning, friends. Good morning, Ty. It's great to be here. It's great to hear the stories today. Great to hear your perspectives and your voice again. It's been a couple of years since I got to hear your voice. Great to hear you again. I was wondering if you know what the celebrations for Thai's birthday are going to be in Vietnam. Are they celebrating Thai's birthday there? And what are people doing around the world to celebrate today? So I just wanted to say thanks again for holding this gathering, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Shane. Wonderful to see you as well, dear brother. Please say hi to Emily for me. What a wonderful question to end on. Every year when Ty's birthday comes around, he tends to ask for the same gift. And the gift that he asks us for is the gift of our own practice. One of the reasons I became a disciple of Thich Nhat Hanh's, even before becoming a monk, I wasn't looking for a new religion. I'm a fallen Catholic, and in a lot of ways don't really vibe with the whole idea of organized religion. I wasn't looking to become a Buddhist. But when I met Thai, I saw so clearly that he was something more than that. And even though he is and was a Buddhist and a Vietnamese man and a very traditional person, he was also this incredible revolutionary. One of the ways I've heard him say it that I think sums it up very clearly is he has said many times, we do not need any more Buddhists. What we need are more practitioners. More people living a life of love and understanding. More people practicing paying attention with love, practicing mindfulness. So I don't know what will happen. I'm sure there'll be some party and some chanting all over the place in all the centers, most especially, of course, where Thai is in Hue. And I know that he is able to be wheeled to a veranda in his quarters that gives him the opportunity to see the brothers and sisters that are practicing at that monastery and supporting him eat and practice and sing and play on this lawn. So I'm sure, health allowing, that he'll get some of that experience tomorrow. But for us, The answer is very clear. We're being asked to give him the gift of our practice, This year, very specifically, the monks and nuns from the home office, from the monastery in southwest France called Plum Village, have written a letter asking us, and you can look at it at plumvillage.org at their website. And they've written a letter, and what they've asked us to practice this year is deep listening. Deep listening. And I think it's it's always a good time to practice deep listening. But I think now more than ever, I feel, certainly as an American, I feel we're living in a world that's pained by the opposite, right? By people who are afraid and who are hurting and who are angry and who feel powerless and unheard. And when somebody is in that situation, they have a tendency to shout, literally or figuratively. And when you're shouting, you cannot listen. When you're interrupting, you cannot listen. When you're talking at someone instead of sharing with someone, you cannot listen. And if we can't listen, then we can't heal. We can't heal. And so I think it's a very apt request this year that we focus on and lean into our listening. My own next workshop is Saturday, November 6th. It's going to go live on my website in the next few days. You'll all hear about it through email and such, social media, all those things. And it's communication for happiness, because I agree. I think this winter is a time for us to focus on how we communicate with each other and how we listen, much more than how we talk. Thank you, Shane. Well, that's all the time we have this week, my friends. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to drop a little, let's see, a little bit in the chat as I do at the end of our meetings, but it's a lot of text that basically just says, stay in contact. You can go to davekenneally.com and sign up for my weekly newsletter. I've recently started sending out a short email every Friday that has a little video teaching. That's just like 5-minute snippets that I'm pulling out of these recorded talks. You can donate if you feel inspired to offer some dana to help me doing this work. You can become my patron and get access through that membership to all of the recordings of all of these sanghas. I think we've been doing it online now for a full year. So there's a lot of them. That's a lot of hours of me jibber jabbing. If you're interested. And it's really just about community. There's a reason why when Thich Nhat Hanh was sitting on that stage in silence for 25 minutes, that he had 100 of us sitting behind him. He was not teaching, sit in your closet at home. And that is the way. He was saying, sit as a community. He was reminding us that this is the practice of family. That's how I like to translate the word Sangha, as a family. And so please continue to be a part of our Sangha family, however works for you. Thank you, friends.